Yeah, let's start.
नहीं सर तो but you know मैंने आपको क्या अर्ज की थी? I just sent you a request, so you start and then I'll pitch in.
Okay, thank you. I didn't see that, unfortunately. I've been on the road. Thank you very much, folks. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to the PIDE webinar. This is our 6th or 7th webinar, thanks to Amer Durrani, Re-Energia, who has been our collaborator. And he's the principal mastermind of this session, not PID. He has done a lot of work with us on railways, put in a lot of dedicated work. So thanks to him, we have now come to a 6th or 7th webinar. We've learned a lot on railways. I'm actually surprised and a bit ashamed at my professional public policy and other professions that we have not focused on railways at all, even though the loss is huge. So it's wonderful to have this webinar. And let's see, it's supposed to be now the institutional arrangements of railways. We discussed a lot of things, including financing, marketing, all kinds of things in the railways. So with that, let me hand it over to Amir to conduct the proceedings. I'll join in later as necessary. So Amir, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. I just hope you're not swimming in Serena and you're going to park on the side. I hope you stay totally active. Well, thank you for opening that. And I first want to thank all the speakers for joining. I see Ishad Saab and Ishad, thank you very much. Asim Bhai, thank you again for joining. This is the second time you have blessed us with your presence. I think it's very nice. And I think I don't see Ranja Saab, but I'm sure Nabil will make that happen. Just to set the context, as Nadeem Saab had said, this is our 6th seminar. So what we've been trying to do is pick out every aspect of Pakistan Railways. And just for you, Dr. Saab, Ishaq Saab, we did the first webinar on visioning. The second webinar we did after visioning was on the history of Pakistan Railways, because there seems to be this romanticism, as you know, one of your colleagues, Hafiz Pasha Saab, I think he's still, he is the biggest romantic, I call him, on Pakistan Railways. So we did that to bring people up to speed on the evolution of Pakistan Railways, where we came from, where the Indian Railways started, how did the railways come to the subcontinent. So very eye-opening piece. And then the last two, one was on the Chinese experience of railways, which is the fastest growth of any network in the world, including that of the high-speed rail. So we really had a lot of learning in that. Hello? Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and then the last one, which as Nadeem Saab pointed out, was on financing all around the world. And I think that institutions we left because we wanted your presence. As you know, we've been hounding you for almost 2 months now. So we know that it's very kind of you to sort of bless us with your presence. But more importantly, Dr. Saab, I don't think I need to introduce you. Almost the entire audience, I'm checking if there are any foreigners, but I think you're well known. So I would just give you the floor. The way we will conduct this is 10 to 15 minutes for each speaker. And between speakers, we'll collect a few questions, and the moderators will pose some questions. And then once all the speakers have ended, then we'll open the floor and collect questions and present them to you. So over to you, Dr. Saab.
Well, thank you very much, Amir. In your presence, I don't think I can actually claim to have any competence to talk about the railways, because you are really the expert on this field. I got hooked up because the Prime Minister assigned me to look at the 10 top loss-making state-owned enterprises, and railways is one of them. So that is how I got to look at the railways at much greater depth than I would otherwise see. And I took some time investigating both the past evolution of railways in the last decade or so, and its present situation. And I didn't go into the romantic past where everybody felt that railway was doing a wonderful job until 1990s, when National Logistics Cell came into being and completely dismantled the monopoly of railways as far as the freight traffic was concerned. So I didn't want to go into that. I recall my own interaction with the railways in the 2000-2006 period, where I used to dole out the overdrafts to railways to meet their deficits, and the overdrafts keep on growing and growing, and I was very concerned. So I had to come to the government of Pakistan and say that this is the limit, and anything beyond that, you have to get a loan to the railways and enter into some kind of remedial agreement with them in order to keep their deficits down. So that was the background I knew about railways. So what I discovered to my horror is that there has been a decline in the capacity of the railway personnel. And not only that you didn't keep up with the times as far as the skill set were concerned, but there was a lot of complacency, a laid back attitude on the part of those who were already working in the railways. There was very little accountability, and people didn't care whether there were leakages in the diesel or there were no repairs being made to the tracks, and whether the trains were running late or not, whether all the safety measures were being taken or not. So we had to come to some kind of an incremental approach. Now, I know you are from your email, I thought you were very dissatisfied with incremental approach, but given the state of art of the railways, I couldn't dare go for a shock therapy approach, which you seem to be suggesting. So the recommendations which I made to the cabinet can be divided into four distinct parts. One is the human resources and the capacity building. We had and we have to induct specialists in the human resources, in business development, in law, in IT, and also land development, because this is a company which in the private sector was sitting with thousands of acres of land, which is both underpriced as well as underpaid as the rents were concerned. This can generate 5 to 10 billion rupees annually without much effort, just rewriting the concession agreements and getting rid of the encroachers who have been utilizing this land. So we wanted to have some handle on this asset base of, so capacity building was my first recommendation. And we are bringing in people from the private sector, from the academia, from outside the railways, because the railway doesn't have. And these are all MP1 scale. So we are giving them 10 lakhs, 15 lakhs of salaries, and the process is highly competitive. There is an advertisement, there are eligibility criteria, there is a short listing, and there are interviews, and then the final selection. So that process is going to take some time. The second part of the capacity building was that we had to go for training of the officers who are already working. And training was kind of a very comfortable easing of the duties, so nobody took them very seriously. So now 15 days training, both in the academy as well as outside academy, for example, in NUST, LUMS, and other places, has been made mandatory. The third one is to upgrade the training academy itself and bring in some instructors who really know what they are doing and imparting that knowledge and expertise along with the on-the-job performance to the officers of the railways, whether they are engineers or whether they are the commercial officers or whether they are transportation officers. Then we had frozen the number of the employees to 62,000 because there's sanctioned strength in 95,000, but we felt that you don't need 60,000, you need substitution as far as the skill set is concerned. There are too many, people who are not contributing to the value addition and very few people who are capable of enhancing the value proposition of railways. So then we engaged the consultants to do workload analysis in order to rationalize the human resource base. And then there are some people who can be retrained in the new requirements of the railways rather than letting them go. We felt that we should utilize the human resources already familiar with the railways. And so some of them, young people, can go for the IT department, for example, if they can be retrained. So that was my first pillar, which is capacity building. And that is the pivot on which the entire restructuring plan really rests. The second is automation, digitization. There was some attempts which have been done in the past. There is a 50% electronic ticketing, but there is no ERP system which integrates all the processes from end to end. There is parallel systems partially doing, and even the financial information, you'll be surprised, comes after 1 month of the closure of the accounts. So the ERP is now being rolled out, and we hope that in about 3 months, the first phase of the ERP will be operational, and that will make the railways completely paperless. All the data will be generated electronically, and there will be the dashboards before the chief executives, the secretary, and the ministers in order to monitor the real-time, indicators. Along with that is the CRM, the customer relation, and a Chinese company which has done this work in China is being commissioned. It's called RAPTA, and they are being asked to create this CRM where you will be having the tracking arrangements as well as the call centers, and there will be SMS alerts about the timing and all other things which are normally done in a railway system. So the ERP and the CRM, and then the infrastructure development and the inventory arrangements and the procurement, I think some of the leakages which are now very rampant in the railways, we hope that that will be taken care of. The third pillar is to create a very robust engagement with the private sector. So my recommendation was to have 5 independent corporate entities. One is independent of the railway ministry itself, which will be ML1. So ML1 will be completely out of the normal rules, procedures, and the ownership of the railway. And because this is going to be $6 to $7 billion project, we need a completely different organizational, financial, and governance operational model for ML1. So I'm keeping ML1 aside, and as you, Amir, pointed out that you would have a session on the ML1. I look forward to learning from that, but that ML1 has not taken off so far because there is a disagreement between the Chinese and Pakistanis as far as the total cost is concerned. So I'll keep that ML1 aside. The second part, which I very much emphasized, was to separate the regulatory function from the operationals. Nowhere in Pakistan, we have the regulator working and directly reporting to the ministry or to the railway board. So what we have asked them is to create an independent regulatory authority. And particularly if you are engaging the private sector, then you should have a level playing field for the private sector. And an independent regulator like OGRA and PEMRA, which is not under the control of the Ministry of Energy, can assure stability, reliability, impartiality to the private sector operators. Otherwise, there's an inherent conflict of interest because the ministry is also operator of the system and they're also concessionaires. They are entering into concession agreements with the private sector. So this cannot go on. So we want a very independent regulatory authority reporting to the cabinet division, not to the railway division, on the lines which we have already done in many other regulatory agencies. And this will be not a railway person, but these will be the people who know law, accounting, finance, economics, and the railway operations. So it will be a highly paid organization with the expertise. The third element of this is to have an infrastructure company which will use the tracks, and they will have the third-party track access, and they will negotiate what the charges, and this will be owned by the government of Pakistan. So this will be a company which will be entering into agreements with the private companies for the use of the third-party access. And they will maintain the track as far as the whole infrastructure is concerned. The fourth company will be for the freight operations. That will be independent also. So we have already corporatized it, and FTC we have hired an individual from the private sector on a open comparative basis. And that individual will be given complete freedom to operate as a corporate entity. And the fifth will be the rail passenger. And as you know, we have already started outsourcing the passenger trains. So 5 trains have so far been outsourced to the private sector. And out of the remaining 35, except those which are to be operated on socio-economic considerations, for example, the lines in Balochistan, they are not commercially viable. They will remain with the railway ministry or the railway board, but all other commercial passenger trains would be outsourced to the private sector. And RailCorp will maintain the infrastructure. And there's another organization called PRAC, which is advisory and consultancy. And we would transform that very soon into a passenger train corporate entity. So that is the whole idea of the private sector engagement. we don't think that the government or the railway board has either the capacity or the ability to carry these operations. And that's our experience. So that is the restructuring plan. The cabinet has approved it, has given the timelines, and the cabinet committee on institutional reforms keeps on monitoring the progress and removing the hurdles. As you know, Amir, we have a lot of coordination failures in the government, and all the ministries, different ministries, have work in very, very independent manner, silo manner. So our task is to remove the hurdles before the railway ministry, which is one of the 40 ministries, so that they can carry on the operational work. And I must say that the progress so far has been quite satisfactory, and their earnings this year are much higher, about 2 to 3 billion. I don't know exactly, but I think the Secretary Railway Board would be able to enlighten you on that, that they have done better this year in the financial terms. The gorilla and the whole operation of the railways is the pension bill. There are 115,000 retirees of the railways, and they get 35 billion rupees annually as far as pensions is concerned. First, there is no way of verification of these individuals. So what we want to do first is to create a biometric verification system for the pensioners. And that is exactly the deficit which is being fielded by the government of Pakistan for the railways. So we have to think how we can ring fence the pension bill of the railways in order to judge their financial performance. And this is a question which is being debated, and we have a pay and pension commission, and that pay and pension commission will have to think about not only railways, but we have other public enterprises. We are facing the same kind of pension problem. So that's a gorilla which we haven't come to grips so far, but I think that is one of these snacks as far as the financial performance in the future is concerned. And we have to find a solution to this problem. So I think I would stop here, and I will listen to the other commentators and answer any questions which may be raised later on. Thank you, Amir.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Thank you very much. This was very illuminating, and I'm sure for those who have not been yet updated on what the government is doing, this was an excellent summary of the interventions that you have overseen. Can I just posit a quick question and then sort of then go to the next speaker? One of the things I wanted you to touch upon. Okay, I mean, you have done the corporate restructuring, but ultimately all this is just the federal railways. Just like you have agreed to ring fence the ML1 and put it as a completely new entity, has there been thought on basically creating provincial and city railways, which some of our cities really, really need now? Starting with Karachi, where you're going to settle, and I'm quite sure you'll be very happy if something like that happens. Let me tell you the reason I put this question to you. Barring the main line, there is no profitable line in Pakistan, right? So that is why once the ML1 comes around, whether we talk about passengers or freight services, ML1 is the crux of it, right? There are many other reasons, almost 1/4 of what the railway carries today, and it could go down to 1/5, is basically its own services. So its own ballast, its own O&M equipment. That's just generally the rule globally, right? So if you separate that, everything, basically a lot of these branch lines, or let's say smaller trains, like other than the mail and the rail car and three other trains, everything else can go to the provinces, almost like the devolution, or that the NTD, for example, the KP transmission company is asking of the transmission lines, right? In the case of power. So this is a subject, to be very honest, which we broached in 2000, right? And during the Musharraf era, we almost started getting traction on really handing over some of the stuff to defense, to provinces, and especially making Karachi like an example, like the Kowloon Railway in Hong Kong, and basically showing what could be done, because Karachi has all the, well, with all the traffic and everything, for this to become a separate entity. So very quickly, I mean, do you see a competitive railway sector outside the federal railway sector coming up?
I wish the provinces could take it over, but the provinces always demand their pound of flesh. They say, okay, you're giving us all these unprofitable companies, give us the money also, which is the case in energy sector. Also, we are handling that particular problem for the discos. But I think we are on the right track with Lahore Metropolitan Metro, with Multan, Peshawar, Pindi. We have already taken them out of the central railways. And I think the Karachi Circular Railway, once it gets going, would also have its own company rather than Pakistan Railways. So to that extent, that all the big cities will have their own railway corporations, your endeavor and your objective is being met. I'm less skeptical that the provinces would agree, especially Balochistan, Sindh and KP would agree on taking over the branch lines. But let's see what the future holds.
Thank you. So Asim, just to, sort of, what I know your last time your intervention was very good, but maybe I would like you to comment a little bit on this devolution of the railway institutions and, the legacy railway, which we have, barring sending everyone home and paying their salaries and then just simply taking over the infrastructure. I would like you to talk about what kind of institutional framework do you see, given the sort of the current reforms that Ishasab has basically laid out. Now, I would also like that if you want to focus more on the freight side, you're welcome. But a general comment on this, on the overall institutional structures, would be very, very welcome. So over to you, Asim.
Okay, thank you. And may I say it's such an honor to be here with Dr. Ishrat Saab. I've had somewhat interaction with Ishrat Saab on the railway restructuring, and commenting on what has been said, I think that the government is right on path, and they have identified how structurally they should move forward. These five institutions, shall I say, that Dr. Ishrat Saab has mentioned, and it's also there in my presentation, not all five, but yes, the four organizations should be separate. They should have well-defined goals. They should have subject specialists from the private sector as well. The training side, so the approach is excellent, and that is the only approach that will bring the overall Pakistan Railways on the right path. Now, just on the outset, what I say about Pakistan Railways is it's not even an organization, it's a department of the Ministry of Railways. So there's a lot of overlap. There is no ownership, very honestly, because it's just a department. So the HR lacks, the clear policies are not there. Dr. Ishrat Saab mentioned training, definitely high on the agenda. Again, these are things in my presentation which from a private sector perspective, mostly of course related to freight, I have done sort of a historical review and where we are today, and suggestions on how we could move forward. But my comment on Dr. Shasab's speech is that 100%, I don't think I could add to anything that the government has planned already and the cabinet has passed. It's just that the implementation is really, really far away, whether it's coordination, whether it's HR, the competence, but definitely from what Dr. Isha Saab would say and comment, and what even the cabinet would pass a plan for restructuring to the people on the ground who would actually carry out the changes. There is a very long gap, and definitely I would actually say more than a lack of understanding. There is a lot of people who would like to maintain the status quo, even though there is no status quo. It's going in further decay. So from the government, 100%.
Are you presenting? Are you able to share screen?
I am presenting, yes. I would like.
While you share screen, let me just tell you that, I love this quote, and I won't tell you where it is written, but it says that to live again, one must first die. So I look upon PR just like you as a large ship, because I know you're from the shipping industry, just like what I was doing until 3 years ago. So basically, I look upon that as this huge anchor that's weighing down a ship that, even the tugs can't move out. So these 5 companies, to me, are the tugs that are trying to get the ship out of the war. So that's the analogy I use. Over, back to you.
Thank you. I don't know whether Dr. Shasab would remember, but I gave these when I started sort of studying the railway sector. That was almost 10 years ago. There is so much potential in this sector. And so, one of my interactions with Dr. Ishra Saab, and I give that as a quote. He asked me about the restructuring and what should be done. So I said, it's just a simple 6th class maths problem. Okay, we are engaged with Pakistan Railways as a partner to run freight trains from Karachi to Lahore. At that time, 2 years ago, the 1,200-kilometer distance between Lahore and Karachi was done in over 80 hours. So the average speed of the train was less than 15 kilometers an hour. So I said, if you can just double that speed to 30 kilometers an hour, that would double your freight revenue immediately. And the number of assets, which the Pakistan Railways is utilizing, basically the public sector investment which is there, is less than 50%. So it's just very basic, very simple. If you can run, faster trains, and if you can utilize more equipment, you would quadruple the revenue. Very simply put. So I'll just give a little perspective on the historical review, the current situation, key challenges, government initiative to reform Pakistan Railways. Change management is where we are seriously lacking, and the proposed reforms, at least from the private sector side. So just to give in perspective, have a look at this. This is from the Pakistan Railways yearbook. In the 50s, the track, okay, was almost the same, but the freight train runs was about 70,000. Then, late 60s, we had 92,000 freight runs. And I'd like to put in perspective the tons carried, okay, the tonnage. So 14.5 million tons in late 60s, let's say, when our GDP was $10 billion. And today, they're doing 8,000 freight runs and lifting 8.3 million tons when our GDP is $314 billion. So 31 times the size of the GDP has increased, and they carry, almost half, but in this 8.3 million tons of their annual tonnage, 3.5 million is actually one power plant in Sahiwal. So technically they are running 5 million tons. They are carrying 5 million tons, So the GDP has grown by 31 times, and the tonnage carried by Pakistan Railways has gone down to a third. The revenue has increased because they are now running on long distances and more trains on long distances, but they've really not kept up with times and the size of our GDP. So just to give a total freight potential of Pakistan Railways, with all the investment in rolling stock that we have about 10,000 wagons, and these 10,000 wagons can, at current freight levels, provide 38 billion rupees, which is twice of what they are doing today. And by the way, I mean, they have increased average speed of the freight trains with this, government restructuring and a lot of noise. So from 80 hours now, the train goes to Lahore in 60 hours. So there is improvement. There is a bigger footprint, as Dr. Ishaq said, that private sector engagement has to be there. Now that private sector engagement process is definitely happening, and they have advertised to outsource freight trains, which I think would be the fourth time in 3 years. And this time, the Minister for Railways is very, very, adamant and serious, and the Secretary Railways also, in making sure that this process goes through. We have a very good 12 parties who have bid, mostly for their own cargo, so they can run block trains, and that is what Indian Railways does to increase their revenue. So I'm very happy that we have now 12 serious parties with basically millions of tons of cargo, which they can easily procure, and it's gone through a tendering transparent process. So the potential of the existing investment of in rolling stock is close to 40 billion rupees, and while our freight revenue is about 19 billion that they have. So we were running over 100 trains per day in the 70s to now 22 trains per day. And I would like to add here that at that time, we only had a single track. Now we have a double track up to Lahore. So 8 to 10 freight trains are running, 4 for Sahiwal coal power plant, like I said, 3.5 million tons just for that. Then we have only one cargo express train, only one coal train for upcountry, and 2 container trains. And these 2 container trains also is because of a lot of noise level created by the private sector. Freight-wise, 60% of the freight revenue actually comes from just the 3.5 million tons of cargo for the Sahiwal power plant. As Dr. Shesab said, from what I have read, the railway deficit is 44 billion and rising, in which, understandably, it's the pension bill, which is the biggest portion of this. But the gap is significantly increasing. The cost of Pakistan Railways operational costs are increasing less than their revenue is increasing, including passenger. So it's about 3.5 billion rupees that they have a deficit, and it's really good that there is a lot of focus. The Honorable Minister is extremely focused on turning around the railways, and it's all coming through the subsidy, incremental losses. And in terms of freight, Amir, you would know, I think railways carries less than 4% of our national freight, which is unbelievable. So in terms of policy, what I have seen, it's remarkable. We had a restructuring of Pakistan Railways white paper, shall I say, which entailed how to turn around Pakistan Railways into 3 core businesses, passenger freight and infrastructure, in 1997. So in 25 years, we've really not worked upon that. Dr. Ishaq, I would like to add here that, for the regulator role, there is an ordinance which was passed, I think, in 2001 or 2002 to create a regulatory body. But because it was an ordinance and because Pakistan Railways couldn't care less, it has never been acted upon, and that regulator's role is clearly defined in the ordinance. on, what are the objectives of the regulator, and that, private sector people would be hired from the market to regulate this industry, and how the private sector engagement, including track access projects, would only be done through that the regulator. But they basically don't even talk about that. Then we have the Pakistan Railway Strategic Plan. I think it was one of the multilateral institutions which worked on this railway strategic plan. With all due respect, I've tried my level best to get a copy of the railway strategic plan, but for some reason, it's a top secret document, and they just refuse to share.
Don't worry,
All
I still don't have it.
Okay, so all I know, requested the multilateral body, I've requested the consultants, everyone, but because of my own involvement and being in the National Transport Policy Committee, which came out with the National Transport Policy, I know that the Pakistan Railway Strategic Plan entails taking the share of Pakistan Railways from in the freight sector from 4% to 25%. Now that would mean billions of dollars of investment in assets and of course in infrastructure as well. But there is a Pakistan Railway Strategic Plan. What I'm trying to say is that the government at the macro level absolutely has always been right, and has been making plans since 1997, as we can see. Nothing wrong with that, but no implementation. And after the reports are made or the policy is approved, no talk about that as well. So from a private sector side who has been engaged with Pakistan Railways for almost a decade now as a partner, we need agents of change, and the government now needs to realize this, that these plans, these objectives are not rolled out, and the actors who are supposed to act out the change actually refuse to do so. So there has to be a policy on how to create these agents of change, whether it comes through training or through a project directorate, or somewhere where there is focus that this is the plan of the government of Pakistan and this is how it has to be implemented, and so that it's not left to those people who should act as agents of change, but they are extremely pro status quo. So, a roadmap with timelines and milestones would be good, a well thought out plan, not just a policy paper. Then long-term sustainability also needs to be ensured, and that long-term sustainability will come when you have identified agents of change, you have trained them. Even if those people change, the new person would get the same strategic, debriefing, whatever you want to call it. There has to be a roadmap, and then, it has to lead to self-correction and adjustments. If there are things which are delayed and there are other things which are stuck because of that, or some things which are difficult to code to crack, we have to have a reforms unit, some body, some department which is focused on it, and it's a self-correcting mechanism. So there has to be like I said, an implementation plan. Not
Asim,
just
sorry,
for-
can we wrap this up in, let's say, another
just for
5?
the-
Thank you.
okay.
Sorry, I mean, we have another speaker. I was just
I'm almost done. So these are the 4 bodies that Dr. Saab said that the government has already worked out. I 100% agree. The 4 things for the infrastructure, for the ML1, passenger freight and freight company, basically. Just last note is that on a macro level, the Ministry of Railways and the Pakistan Railways role has to be defined. There seems to be sometimes when it suits the Pakistan Railways, a lot of reliance on the ministry, and sometimes in the ministry, if it suits them, a lot of reliance on Pakistan Railways. The roles and responsibilities, unfortunately, are not defined, which gives the space to people who are against change, to just rigmarole things. Outsourcing of commercial business has started, outsourcing of passenger trains has started. There has to be a focus on asset management, that this is the infrastructure we have. We can run so many trains, and so many trains, whether passenger or freight, can give us so much revenue. These are the rolling stock that we have. We have invested so much money in this rolling stock, and now we need to recuperate, and this is how we are going to do it: target results and recourse. Terminals investment is one of the things that I would like to highlight here. Without efficient investment in efficient terminals, the operations of the rail Pakistan, the trains is also suffering for freight. And just day before yesterday, I was in Islamabad dry port. It's an excellent facility, brand new, but there's no train which goes there. And it has a bonded section, it has a non-bonded section. Only trucks are going there, whatever the trade is doing. The same goes for Mughal the Pakistan Railway owns a dry port, Azakhail, same thing. So there is no implementation plan. I mean, it's a very good facility, excellent, but there is no operational plan. So nobody knows, how to go get the business, how so that the trains can run over there. So, terminals investment, leave it to the private sector, advertise, give the land to the private sector, let them invest in it. Infrastructure manager has to be there. Track access projects is one of the things where, you just look at the track capacity and then you advertise for people, for companies to come and run their own trains, and they pay you per ton kilometer or some yardstick just for using your empty track. So capacity allocations have to be done for both rolling stock, for the infrastructure. Micro level, redefining goals and objectives at the people level, at the low level, talent acquisition and development, transport, market assessment. They have no clue, the people at the moment in Pakistan Railways, except for, what freight is. They really don't understand market dynamics, how logistics, transportation, and then, there have to be target results and recourse. So, so this in itself, so the government plan, yes, very good, 25%. So I don't know whether they'll be able to achieve it even with the capacity of ML1, but okay, but this has to be thought through. There has to be a project management office or a directorate or whatever, and then you have to make agents of change and train them basically to deliver. That's about all that.
Thank you very much, Asim. So I just want to ask Nabil, I don't see Ranja Saab around. Can you just identify if he's here? In the meantime, just, something that Asim, you and Dr. Saab, I just thought about, I just jotted down. So, I think there is at the fiscal level, right, at where you play in the stratosphere in Ministry of Finance, $1 trillion plus power sector debt, right? So if you look at the number, 44 billion Pak rupees of losses by railways, I think everyone is kind of like, okay, we'll solve this later.
Annual.
No, I know. Please understand, currently, I just gave a lecture at the National School of Public Policy on energy. That was 2 days ago. And I could, the latest number is 1.27 trillion. This is the power sector debt, right? So we basically, I'm just saying, this is the current accumulated amount, Asim. Current accumulated amount, yeah. So the thing is that every year we're trying to pay off 150 or something. I'm just trying to say there's a certain numbness. And I think that it is coming from a lack of complex thinking. And I think a lack of probably a very unsophisticated financed Ministry of Finance, Ishad Saab. Because if I can tell you that you add to this 44 billion, and I listed these, the externalities, the higher cost of transport to both internal and external trade. External trade is about roughly, if you think about it, it's about 150 billion tons. We add to that another 600 million tons of basically internal trade. That is losing a certain amount of cost because it's paying a much higher cost for long distance travel. And the end result is the consumer gets a more expensive product. The higher cost of transport to internal and external trade, plus the higher environmental externalities. So a train moves the same amount of kilogram in 13 times more efficiently. Add to that the higher accident cost and the health bill on Pakistan. Pakistan has one of the highest road fatality rates because of primarily the freight and other traffic that moves on this road. And then add to that our ability to respond to disasters. One thing that I think our planners don't understand, that in times of disasters, a track is the fastest thing to bring back online. And this has been shown again and again and again. And so anyhow, I mean, let's, do we have Raja Sahab here quickly?
वो सर अभी तक ज्वाइन नहीं किया सर.
Acha, join नहीं किया. So I guess, Isha Sahab, maybe we can continue with you. With the
I don't think anybody would disagree with the economic and social environmental costs which you have. Everybody knows this. So that's not the issue. The issue is whether this company is capable of delivering what we want it to do. So we have to invest first in the capability of the railways, because it cannot do it. So we have to go to the other option, which is the public-private partnerships and outsourcing completely to the private sector without any intervention by the railway board or by the railway ministry. And that's why we want a completely neutral regulator which can adjudicate any conflicts or disputes between the concessionaire and the concession grantor. So that is the whole purpose, is to completely obviate all these costs, but it won't happen overnight. And I must tell you, I don't think, Asim, you have seen the annexures to the restructuring plan. It has milestones, it has timelines, it has targets, it has complete implementation plan. Now, where I totally agree with both of you is whether the railway ministry, which is quite good at this moment because you have a very dynamic minister and a very dynamic secretary, they are quite willing to stick their neck out. Whether the entire railway machinery of 62,000 people are aligned with these objectives and with these goals or not, I'm not sure about that. And that's where the management comes in, where you have incentives for rewards and penalties. So we are bringing in an HR advisor who is a professional who would design the incentive structures so that the performance management system is not on the basis of seniority, but achieving the targets which have been given to you. But I cannot tell you that this is going to happen overnight. This is a long-term phenomena. This is the starting of a journey which will take some time. But in the meanwhile, we want to make use of our assets, both on the land side as well as the track, to giving out to the private sector. So that, I think, is the idea. And I said right at the beginning that, you know, Amir, being an expert, would like us to do more things, but we have to look at the capability of the people who are going to implement these changes, which is very, very low compared to other enterprises I have come across. For example, PIA is a much better shape as far as the capabilities are concerned compared to the Pakistan Railways. I'll just give you two examples.
No, Dr. Saab, so I'm going to paraphrase a few questions that I've received. So the first one is that, is there any sunk cost analysis being done? By sunk cost, I mean that if you do an actuarial survey on what exists in terms of the 70,000 odd employees in the railways, you just park them somewhere, shut the current railway structure, because if you look at the net output of this structure, right, it's now less than 3% of all the freight that moves in Pakistan. And if you add the passengers about 7%, right? Nothing will happen to Pakistan if Pakistan railway employees were just given their salaries and sent home, and then Pakistan Railway was reimagined, right? That's my first question. I've added this last part myself. The second question to you and Asim to you is basically coming from Okay, this is basically coming from my own company, but okay, let me just ask that quickly. Basically on ancillary lands, right? So you said that railway, so, one of the first things is that the railway lands are such that they were given by the state. And so eventually, if you don't use them for railway purposes, they have to go back to the crown. I'm just giving you the anecdote, right? So the crown right now is the province. The province, barring any land, it has to go back to the province. The provinces, that's why we have the federal area, and that's why the first emergency in 48 Feb was imposed, because to get land for a capital in Karachi. So I'm just saying, what are we doing with the land in your reform program? That is a question. And third and last, which is a question from me, is the Rail Regulatory Authority Act existed long before, was scuttled. So in what form are you resuscitating this Rail Regulatory Authority? So those three things, and I'll start with Ishusab and Asim, then I'll come to you.
Well, I think I've already explained that from 95,000, the number has come down to 62,000, which is about 30,000 people are no longer in the railways. And the rate of attrition, if you take that, then the people are going to be retiring or resigning, and they won't be replaced. But we are giving the business away from the railway employees to the private sector. And that is what the whole exercise is. We will continue to pay them, but we are going to abolish all the posts as and when they retire. And I think in the 5 years' time, they will all disappear. So that is the plan. You cannot actually play with the human beings because they have families, they have everybody. And dignity is also something which it's not only the money, but going and saying that I work for the railways and this is what I do. I think you do not play with the dignity of the people. And I believe in that. So I don't want to have any drastic measure as far as human resources are concerned. We don't want to throw anybody on the street. That I quite can tell you. Now, as far as the ancillary land is concerned, Amir, there is 178,000 acres of land under railway, out of which 145,000 is being used for operational purposes. Now there is 33,000 acres, which are the right of way. Delhi Metro is making money not from the train fares, but it is making from the commercial enterprises on the right of way, which is granted to the Delhi Metro Railway. So what we are saying is that transform your railway stations of Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad, Pindi to begin with, and Peshawar, make them like the airports, that you have the decent shopping plazas, you have decent cafes, you have decent restaurants. And this is what India is also doing. So we are saying use these ancillary properties, ancillary land, in order to use them for the railway purposes. We are not giving up the railway. It is a right of the way. For any infrastructure project, you have a very important right of the way entitlement. And that's what we are talking about.
On the Railway Regulatory Act, I mean the RRA.
I have no idea about this. I just heard from Asim and I heard from you. I must confess that I had no idea, but I'll go back and try to dig it out and see where it stands.
Okay, Asim, over to you.
Okay, so in terms of redefined roles, I of course agree with Dr. Ishrat Saab that you can't throw out 60,000 people, but how the reforms are going to redefine roles to something what Dr. Ishrat Saab just said. So if there are these 4 distinct entities or 5 with the regulator, but the 4 distinct entities which are well defined with their roles and responsibilities, and you know, of course, I'm closely looking at the railway freight company, which is already there and which is interested with doing work for the Saiwal plant, coal plant, and now hopefully the rest of the freight will all go there. So the government plans that they are going to get people who understand change and what is to be done from the Pakistan Railways, just as Dr. Shahsab said, we can retrain them and then get, private sector people. But the railways freight company and the railways passenger company basically will become one window shops or coordinating bodies whereby the operational aspects and the maintenance of the assets will be done by Pakistan Railways itself, but the commercial viability and the commercial, operational control will be with the private sector. So these companies, the freight company or the passenger company, will actually only be like a one window and to sort of coordinate between the operations that the Pakistan Railways needs to conduct and what is required from the private sector in terms of basically the top line, raising revenue, passenger revenue and freight revenue. So, and as Dr. Ishar Saab said, I 100% agree. If you can have a hybrid setup, because these companies have never, they've been there, Prax and PRFTC, but they've never really been staffed because, people are anti-status quo. So now if there is a focus, which certainly there is a focus by the ministry in staffing them with competent people, with subject specialists, and with giving them clear roles and responsibilities. So over time, like Dr. Shahsab said, due to attrition, these positions in Pakistan Railways will become redundant and will decrease. Secretary Railways was telling me last month that he's very clear the railways, staff would come down to 3 to 5,000 people from the 60,000 strength. But certainly, then the companies, although they will only be coordinating, will have maybe 1,000 people maximum to do the job. So this is basically more like redefining the goal. So it's a hybrid thing of what Amir you are saying, to shut down the railways, but it can't be shut down because operational control will still remain with Pakistan Railways.
No,
You know,
I think
I,
that first and foremost, we have to shut down the Ministry of Railways before that. But Asim, if I may take a question, because we are at an hour and 4 minutes. So Noman, Nabil, could you see who this gentleman, unmute Noman?
My name is Numan Nabi. I'm a communication practitioner. I got interested in this webinar. I was also participating in the previous one. My question is very simple. Since Asim Saab has mentioned marketing, and marketing is obviously aimed at increasing traffic with the railways, can we get an idea of what kind of ratio exists between passenger and freight revenues in the region? And how is Pakistan Railway performing in terms of carrying passengers, in terms of numbers of those who travel by road, by rail, or by air? And maybe we can pick up Sri Lanka or India. Indian Railway is obviously very advanced. A simple question. Can we have some numbers to understand what marketing can do for railways?
Okay, I will let Asim take the question on what marketing can do. But Noman Nabi, for beginners, I would suggest there is a lot of material. We already mentioned what percent of the total passenger kilometers and freight kilometers, or what we call ton kilometers, TKMs, are moved by which mode of transport. So that we know, the rail does abysmally. So maybe if you can answer, you can directly message me and I can give you those a report with those numbers. Asim, if you could answer the question, which I understand is, what can marketing do to, I guess, improve, attract more freight to the railways? I guess that's what he's asking.
It's not freight, it's basically monetizing the assets. And in terms of marketing, just as Dr. Shahsab ne bhi kaha, that if we look at the massive railway stations that we have, and if we pick up the 3 or 4 large cities, then surely even however in terms of its share insignificant it is, but we have millions of passengers going on to these trains every year. And so from a marketing perspective, this analysis has to be done. What is the, footfall in different train stations, which perhaps could be taken from the number of passengers in the trains. This data may be available. We can dig up the Pakistan Railways yearbook or the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics and sort of have a look. Abhi, jaise Dr. Shah Saab said, I think they advertised for 30 passenger trains to be outsourced. So Noman Saab, I'm sure that these numbers, would be there in those 30, in the facts given for those 30 passenger trains as to how many people are traveling on these trains and from which destination to which destination. So we can do branding of the trains, we can do branding of the railway stations, and we can do branding along the track as well. And it all depends on the footfall, basically, and the visibility. The numbers can be taken, but is pe koi kaam? I mean, we have private sector people now in Pakistan Railways in marketing, head of marketing, and in head of HR also. So maybe Noman Saab, you can speak to the head of marketing in Pakistan Railways and see if he has some numbers.
Ahmed,
Okay,
let me add to what Asim was saying. Look, already in these 5 trains, the operators are contacting the bus operators that if you bring in passengers to the railways, we will give you such and such, a fee for bringing them. Or on the traffic where it slows down, they say we'll give discount because we want to attract more passengers. Now, nobody in the railway board or the railway ministry could think of these innovative marketing ideas in order to create the business. Only the private sector can do it. And that, I think, is the beauty of allocating where the responsibility should go. Whatever organization can do it better, the government should make policies and regulate, while the private sector should carry out the commercial operations. This is the division of labor which I have spelled out for you.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Saab. And I mean, I just did a very rough calculation on the land. So 11,000 track kilometers with a 50-meter right of way, 257 acres to a square kilometer, I roughly get a number of 140,000. So that's the acreage right associated with that. But if you add to that the acreage, anyhow, I mean, my point is, look, 24 years on Pakistan Railways, right? During which time, had I just stuck with Pakistan Railways, I would have gotten nowhere. But all these things have been tried. Now, let me just simply tell you that the one thing, this packing passengers in train, it's not just a question of when, and you're asking a bus terminal, because remember these bus terminals, the Niazis and all, I mean, we have studied the bus sector as well. It is going to compete with railways. This initial euphoria of getting a few people packing a train is the same thing as offering a freight train. What is needed is the private sector to have the paths and run its own trains. That is not happening, because what Pakistan Railway is afraid of is losing the people that they employ, and the employees are telling them, we will not go work for a private operator who operates trains. By train operation, Ishit Saab, track access is what we mean, that people bring their own rolling stock and their own motive power, and Pakistan Railway only provides the traffic control, what is in aviation terms the ADC. Please.
That is the next step, that we are going to give the rolling stock responsibility to the companies. These are nascent companies. They haven't actually nurtured themselves. So we are having joint venture companies for wagons, for the train, for the freight trains, and for the coaches to be manufactured in Pakistan. And once they start, then the private sector can take them. But that's the next step. You have to go in phases. You can't just jump. And it is not that the private sector will not take some of the employees of the railways. Let me give you the example of the nationalized commercial banks. They had a large number of support staff. They outsourced that, and the private companies who took those got a lot of productivity out of the same people who were working for HPL and UBL as the nationalized commercial banks. Because Asim knows how to hire and fire people, which cannot be done by a president who is there as a government employee, because he has no stake in there. So I'm quite sure that when the private sector takes over, there will be some railway employees who are quite efficient, quite productive, they will be screened. And for them, this experienced man or a person is very useful. Their initial training cost is almost zero for them. So from an economic point of view, I would imagine that any private sector operator will hire some of the better people and also have incentive structure whereby they reward the people who are doing well. That is my presupposition.
यहाँ पे
Awesome
सर
word.
I would like to add some things sir. ये जो track access है ना, I agree वैसे आमिर, just to make an analysis. So basically, you know, with the asset management, you have investments in rolling stock. So by outsourcing freight trains, you know, you maximize the revenue. Just as Dr. Ishaq is saying that I know how to maximize the revenue. So the operations is with Pakistan Railways. Similarly, you look at the track capacity and you say, okay, you know, we can run so many trains per day from this sector to this sector, and see if you can utilize your own 10,000 wagons to do that. Or if you can't, then you go on to the track access, you know, side, and you advertise for people to bring their own rolling stock. Dr. Saab, what I would like to add to what you just said was that जिस तरह से IPP की policy आई थी, so then there was a total ban on public sector investment in power generation, you know. Now with track access projects, okay, over the horizon, but in, you know, in sight, and with the outsourcing of freight trains, I think the government should consider not expanding, you know, or investing public money now in rolling stock. Only invest in infrastructure, because, you know, I see, I'm not criticizing, but I do see that a lot of investment has been allocated to acquiring more rolling stock for Pakistan Railways.
That will be done by the joint venture company. That's not going to be done by government of Pakistan. I can assure you that.
No public fund.
All the investment will be done by the joint venture partner, which is a foreign company, and they will manufacture, they will bring in their own investment. The government of Pakistan will not pay anything to that. They will be just the joint venture partner in that.
For the rolling stock, so no investment from PSDP, sir?
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Okay, that's an excellent bit of news. I think it's a great bit of news to actually thank our panelists. Dr. Nadeem-ul-Haq Saab, are you there? Can you jump in to say goodbye, or should I close the session? But before
I'm very much here. I'm very much here.
So
And
let
I've enjoyed the
me hand it
discussion.
over to you then. I think this has been a very lively session, and then, you know, I just want to, my last say, Dr. Saab, mind na karega. इसे साहब आप अपने रिफॉर्म का ये देखें कि हम पूरे 1.5 हफ्ते से रेलवे को, सेक्रेटरी को, सबको फोन कर रहे हैं कि इसमें आ जाओ आ जाओ आ जाओ, and they refuse to show up today. So I beg to, if you allow me my opinion, you know, that's all I can tell you.
अगर तुमको भी सेक्रेटरी, आमिर तुम्हें भी अगर सेक्रेटरी बना देते ना, तुम भी यही करते. तुम्हें पता नहीं है कि सेक्रेटरी की जिंदगी क्या होती है.
सर चले ठीक है सर. सर वो मुझे तभी तो सेक्रेटरी बनाते नहीं है. आप इसका जवाब ही दे सकता हूँ.
Amir, I'm going to take off from where you left off. पिछली बारी भी रेलवे को जब बंदा बुलाया था, पिछली 2-3 बारी वो नहीं आए. तो quite frankly, I agree, officials बहुत busy होते हैं, but quite that is part of the problem. कि officials are too busy and they can't do the job they're supposed to do. So I think one of the reform things that I would urge actually is this useless busy work, Parkinson's law operating in government must stop. The second thing is कि ये बड़ी बातें सुनी है track access और rolling stock करिए, और वही तो मुझे याद है 10 साल पहले हमने track access किया था, वो अभी तक हुआ नहीं है, बातें बड़ी हुई हैं, और उससे पहले भी बड़ी देर से ये बातें हो रही हैं. तो quite frankly this is a long legacy. The third thing, इशरत साहब ने कहा, बड़ी अच्छी बात कही कि आप बंदे नहीं फायर कर सकते, पर इशरत साहब ने साथ ही ये भी कह दिया कि नेशनलाइज सेक्टर जब हमने प्राइवेटाइज किया तो हमने नेशनल बैंक वगैरह, शौकत तरीन इज वेरी फॉन्ड एंड वेरी हैप्पी टू अनाउंस, और मैंने एक पेपर में भी रिकॉर्ड किया था हाउ मेनी पीपल ही फायर्ड फ्रॉम अबीब बैंक, एंड Zubair Sumro also fired from National Bank. So there were people fired in the first round of privatization, not only from banks, but from many other agencies. Almost all the cement plants, everything that was privatized had a huge amount of firing. Now, why are we letting 60,000 people in railway hold Pakistan to ransom? After all, we are giving them a huge subsidy. a huge loss that is being covered for the last God knows how many decades. So I think this has to be taken seriously too. The third thing that I don't understand is कि सब बातें हो रही है corporatization ये वो वगैरह वगैरह, but it's still a department. It
Yes,
cannot be
not.
corporatized unless
No,
it's
it's
a
not a
department.
department. It's
It's
no
not a
longer a
department.
department.
It's no longer, it's a corporate entity.
The railway will be independent of the government ministry. It will be run as a corporate sector.
When?
When these 4 companies are set up, which I just described, there will be
But
corporate
when?
entities. And by the
We
way,
should-
Zubair and Shaukat didn't fire. They were all absorbed by the private sector outsourcing companies. Not a single, I was at Governor State Bank at that time. I can tell you everyone was absorbed by the private sector outsourcing companies.
We can absorb all the railway people in a government entity very easily. But
No,
at
not in
least
government
railway,
entity, not in government entity. These were private sector
okay,
provider of services,
okay,
janitorial services, air conditioning services,
इनको भी कर
messenger
लें.
services, security services. They were all absorbed by the private sector companies.
Okay, why can't railway people be accorded the same क्या कहते हैं, courtesy?
Yes, they will be. Exactly, that's
When?
what I said. You didn't hear me. When
Okay,
these,
fair enough.
when they,
So I've,
when the private sector companies come in, they will screen, they will hire the people they need. These are experienced people. How can a private sector person get people from outside a monopoly? This is a very, commonsensical thing. They will go
Agreed.
first to the people
Agreed.
who are experienced.
So basically, it's going to be business as usual until we get these companies formed in some time
They
in
are
the future.
formed. They are formed. They are operating. Their private sector heads have been, hired. They are now working as a
So-
private sector companies.
So when is the railway division going to be dissolved?
No, railway division will never be dissolved because the policy making will still remain with the railway division.
And the secretary, railways, will still be the chairman of the railway board.
No, we are changing that. We are bringing in a private sector individual.
When is that going to happen? When is that going to happen?
There's a law which is going to the parliament.
Okay, okay. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the same position that we are talking about a lot of things, but we'll wait to see this happen, because I hope in my lifetime, there will be a railway that's independent of the railway division, and the secretary and the minister, like apna Sheikh Rashid, like apna wo, kya naam hai, Belor and everything, they want to run the railways. I hope the minister and the secretary stop running the railways. There will be a corporation. There will be professionals running the railways, just like banks. And I hope we can have railway listed on the stock exchange. That is the future we should be looking at, no matter how many companies there are, 3, 4, 5. But at some point, the line must be drawn between the minister and the secretary and the railways, because we have paid a huge price by actually politicizing the railways. Half the problem is we politicize every public sector enterprise, and it is time for us to really call a halt to this. So thank you very much, folks. Everybody, great pleasure. Amir, thanks for arranging these. Ishwar Saab, thank you for joining us. Asim Saab, thank you for joining. Inshallah, we'll go to the next round of railways, Amir, whenever you allow. Thank you. All the best, folks. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.